will be a very lively, interesting, and challenging discussion. So may I introduce to you all Matt Jones, professor from Swansea University in the UK.
Thank you very much. And yeah, my thoughts are with Andy and his family. The things people do to avoid coming to Interact. Goodness me. And it's a great pleasure to be back here in Mumbai, a place which I see as really a second home. I have really, really fantastic friends and really a family to me here. So it's wonderful to be able to join you all here. And thank you for staying to this closing keynote. To help me do this talk, I'd like to start by asking you a few questions. So first of all, could you put your hand up if you work on what we might call today's technology? So mobile phones, cloud services, tablets, PCs, yeah, quite a lot of hands going up. Thank you very much. Now, what about the future? 5 years, 10 years down the line. Can you raise your hand if that's where your focus is? You're developing the next generation of technologies, which some of us might use in a decade's time. Fewer hands, 1 or 2. Yeah, quite a few coming up as well. Great. It's like an exam, this, isn't there? Next question. Put your hand up if you work mainly with and for traditional users. Now, by traditional user, I mean people like you and me. People that you might find in metropolitan Mumbai or metropolitan London, metropolitan San Francisco. So hands up, mainly working with traditional users. Okay, good number of you, thank you. Last question. What about emergent users? So these are people who are just getting their hands on technology. They're relatively less educated, have fewer access to digital services and technologies, perhaps have less money to be able to do and access the sorts of things that we take for granted. So hands up if you're working with emergent users. Great. And I've seen some fantastic talks over the last couple of days with some really interesting projects in that space. So I know you're all tired, so I'm going to just tell you to listen very carefully. So if there's only one thing that you take away from this talk, this should be it. It doesn't matter if you're working with today's technology or the future's technology. Doesn't matter if you're focused on traditional users or emergent users. By the end of this talk, I want to persuade you that all of us need to work with emergent users thinking about the far-off future. Because if we involve ourselves with that perspective, then all of the technologies for everybody will be enriched. And I'm going to unpack that a little over the next 40 minutes or so. But first, I'm going to take you back to my past. I know it's hard to believe, but I'm quite old. And I've been working in, I heard a laugh. This was one of the first pieces of mobile interaction design user experience that I was involved in some 25 years ago. It wasn't called user experience design then. No one had invented the term. And we had a very small palette to design with, as you can see. A few Figly keyboard and a little screen. Getting anything to work was extraordinarily difficult. And also, when it did work, amazing magic. So jump forward 25 years, and hasn't the world changed so much? This is an art installation created by one of our PhD students, ex-PhD students, Will Thimbleby. He's now working at Apple in California, and he made that for an exhibition for Apple. And what you can see here is a river of iPads joined together. And the visitors to the exhibition are staring in wonder as they see in real time all of the downloads from the App Store. We've come to a time where experience is so diverse, it appears. where there's an app for absolutely everything. So, I'm getting quite old now. Maybe my job is done. We have defined user experience, and here it is. Look at this guy. He looks like he's on drugs. And he is. He's got in there, in that box, what he believes is a wonderful world, a portal, a pool into an amazing, unlimited set of experiences, each at 99 cents. Perhaps I should pack my bags, we should all pack our bags, Interact 2019, perhaps we don't need it, Our job is done. Satisfied, happy user experience. But I'm depressed. This was me with a wig on. Bit depressed. And let me tell you why. There are two reasons for my despair, which I hope to come out of by the end of this talk. The first is this. Take a look at that guy in close-up again, the one staring down in that river of apps, and then consider another person who looked down into a dark pool. This is Narcissus. It's Greek mythology. It's not true. So don't get too sentimental and sad when I tell you the story. Narcissus was a handsome man, and he was drawn into a forest. And in that forest was a wonderful dark pool. He bent down, he looked into the pool, and he saw an amazing sight. He didn't realize it was simply his reflection. He was entranced by what was in that pond. He touched his finger into the pool, perhaps a bit like us, as we stare down into dark pools and touch our fingers onto the surface. He was transfixed. Meanwhile, remember this is mythology. There were water nymphs. Water nymphs are like angels, but they're like water as well. And they're flapping above Narcissus' head. And they love him, and they're real. So they shout to him, Narcissus, Narcissus, look up. Engage with us. But he can't draw his eyes away from the pool, and, this is the sad bit, he dies at that pool, dead to the world. Now, of course, there's been lots of talk about, are we all becoming Narcissuses? And there are books and counterbooks and debates and arguments. I'm not going to get into that today. There's some great books like Alone Together by Shirley Turkle that you can read if you want to think about those arguments. But forget about the philosophy. I bet you have all had this sort of reality. And we're all amongst friends, and it's all anonymous. So put your hands up if you've ever sat across the table from a lover and looked down at a phone instead of into their eyes. Pop your hands up. Remember, it's anonymous. Ooh. And what about where you've got a kid, or your nephew or your niece, and they've got something they want to show you. They've got a picture they brought home, which they've crafted with real paint, and they hold it up at you, and you go, yeah, just got to do my Facebook. Yeah, very important. Anyone do that? Ooh, shame on you. Shame on you. It's the first audience that's ever agreed to that. You're very honest, the Interact audience. Perfect. And as we look down into these dark pools, what we're getting often is a reflection of ourselves. We're seeing ideas and thoughts being reflected back, which are very similar to ours. Or we're seeing some ugliness, in people who post in order to cause the opposite of hope, who post to create despair, and the opposite of joy, people who post to make fear and division. So that's the first reason that I'm depressed. I don't think Keynote should depress people, right? We should move on, I guess. The other reason is a more pragmatic one. Here's a newspaper article, The Economist magazine, earlier this year, and the Economist journalist went down to Barcelona and went to the big GSMA conference, where all of the companies, mobile phone companies, showcase their future devices and services. And in the article, you can read their review. What they saw was a sea of sameness. And the big headline, the big news was, more black rectangles made their debut in Barcelona. Have we got to a point of design where this is it? A black, dark rectangle which draws you in, away from the world, and more into yourself. How did we get here? So just last week, of course, the iPhone was released, and here's a newspaper cutting from another newspaper in the UK, The Sun. So instead of the iPhone, they call it the Sci-phone. People are losing interest, perhaps, with the sort of designs that are being generated by big companies. How did we get here? How did we let this happen? I started working in mobile UX 25 years ago. I've seen some amazing developments. But now I feel like we've come to a stop. How did we get here? Now I'm going to argue that we got here because of a particular perspective. There's a magical place, a wonderful place, a beautiful place. Some of you might even come from it. It's called California. Put your hands up if you come from California. Fantastic, a couple of people. But in fact, we all come from California. And by all of us, I mean all of us traditional users. It's a place of our imaginations, a place of high-tech innovation and wonder, and a place that sends forth great goods to the rest of the earth in terms of digital innovation. If you've got an iPhone, you can turn it over now, and you'll see that seductive marketing slogan, designed by Apple in California. But this is not a rant about Apple. Almost every single high-tech digital service, mobile device that you can think of will have those words somewhere etched on it. This is a Google Nexus charger. Apple has a patent, believe it or not, on the phrase, but that doesn't stop Tesla. So if you're thinking of buying a Tesla, this is the charging station. Guess what? Designed in California. Or if you've got Vans shoes, designed in California. California is an amazing place, a place that fuels our imaginations about the future. This is a conference, and only me is talking at the moment. So I'd like you just to turn to somebody next to you. Maybe this isn't possible because you've conferred so much. Find someone you haven't spoken with. And can you just share with them what you think about what I've just said? What does California mean to you? What does designed in California mean to you? For my sake, make some noise. Talk about something else, if not that. And just spend the next 30 seconds, say hello to someone new, if possible, get up, wander around. This is a conference. This is interact. And what does that mean? Designed in California. And what about my argument? Do you think it's nonsense? Do you agree with my argument? Or do you think, goodness me, this keynote is nuts, but it's only 30 minutes left? Okay, thank you very much. So this is where I find it's impossible to restart. So that's the end of the keynote. Thank you very much indeed. No, that noise is really good, right? You've had 3 or 4 days of conference, you're still talking. And just in case I forget to say so, I just want to say how amazing this conference has been, and Aniruddha and his colleagues and all the other time, it's amazing. And you're all conferring. This is a real conference. So you've all had your thoughts or initial thoughts about what that phrase means and how we might move on from there. what I'd like us to think about is how do we move on from this situation? We have a future world that is designed in that magical place, California. And don't be tied down to thinking about it as just a physical place, a location. It's a place of your imaginations. And then, you know, it's assembled somewhere. China, go on, make it, right? And then the rest of us have to somehow put up with it. How can we move on and make a better future? Now, what I'm going to argue is that we need new perspectives. And those perspectives, whatever you're doing in research or in industry, as I said at the start, would be really enriched if you took the emergent user perspective. And as I said, these are people in communities. Some of you I know went to Dharavi, the slum not far from here, and you would have seen the contexts and some of the people perhaps that we, as our team, have been working with over the last 4 to 5 years. So people whose literacy is lower, educational attainment is lower, they have other resource constraints too. They might have jobs which require them to be hypermobile, not just moving from home to office to home. And when they get home, you know, many of us might have bought smart speakers, Alexa or Google Home. And that kind of works when you've got lots of rooms in your house. But what does it mean if you've got one room and you share it with an extended family? There are fantastically interesting, different resource constraints. And just contrast that, you know, just to be clear, here is a quite famous tradition. That's where we divide up the audience in people who have taste and watch good films and people who don't. So this is a famous traditional user. He is relatively rich. He is relatively educated, and he's definitely tech savvy because he advertises everything technological. And he is like you and me. We are the traditional user. Those of you who don't know who this is, shame on you. You've been a whole week in India? Come. Now, for traditional users, there's something called traditional HCI. And we've been learning about traditional HCI all week. Yeah? You identify some gap in the knowledge, you think about an interesting solution, you study a context, you do some prototyping, you might do some deployments, and then you write papers or you build a project. For emergent users, there's something called, well, I'm just calling it, traditional HCI for D, HCI for development. And if you look into the literature, there are lots of fantastic examples of where researchers and companies have tried to take slightly older technology or technology we might have had our hands on a couple of years ago, changed it, adapted it, so it fits better into the emergent user contexts. And that is very, very important work. And if you're just getting into doing emergent users work, then this is a good place to start. I want to give you 2 examples of what we've done in our team in terms of traditional HCI for development. And the first is a project that we did with IBM Research in Delhi with their spoken web. Now, the spoken web, if you don't know what it is, was a fantastic idea. You could take any phone, a dumb phone, a basic phone, a landline, and dial up a voice service. And then using touch tone and some limited speech, you could access a wealth of information. It was really good for emergent users because it didn't require any internet connection. And then, as now, there are, believe it or not, people who can't get access either by where they live or by the cost to a data plan. It was spoken, so there weren't issues of textual literacy. And the interaction was fairly simple. You pressed buttons and you spoke simple words. We wanted to add some features to that service, and our users simply had basic phones. So think about that phone I showed you at the start. A little keyboard and a black and white screen. It wasn't a touch screen at the front. And what we did was to add gestures onto the back of the device so that when you were listening to the voice service, you could tap or scratch, and those noises were picked up only by the microphone of the phone that you were using, sent down the standard telephone line, and those patterns were recognized, and they were used to change the service. And I'll just show you a little clip here, or an audio transcript, so you can get a sense of the interaction.
आवश्यक माहिती मेळवવા માટે જણાવેલ નંબર દબાવો. પ્રશ્ન પૂછવા માટે દબાવો નંબર 1. માહિતી સાંભળવા માટે દબાવો નંબર 2. રેડિયો કાર્યક્રમ સાંભળવા માટે દબાવો નંબર 3.
Okay, so those who could speak that language, could you follow that sped up version? Put your hand up if you could. Well done. And so what you saw there was a user dialing up the service, and they were familiar with the prompt, so they just tapped the back of the phone, and that made the service speed up its audio to a speed that they could still understand, but get through the instructions more quickly. So that's example 1. Second example is trying to deal with the downsides of IVR. So I've said already there's some very good advantages of voice response services for emergent users, but there's some very bad things about them too. And I'll show you a picture that explains that. Put your hands up if you've ever used a customer telephone service where it says, press option 1 for this, 2 for this, and then you press option 3, and it goes, press option 1, and then, after about an hour, you scream and slam the phone down. Yeah? So IVR systems, because they're not visual, for those of us who are not sight impaired, they're really difficult for us to keep a model in our head of the menu structure. And we very easily get lost in this audio space. So what we did, again working with the SpokenWeg team, was to think about how we could join up physical objects, newspaper, posters, any object where you could take a picture of it using either a smartphone or a feature phone, and then that picture could be used to navigate the voice service. And I'll show you a little video so you get a better sense of what we tried to achieve.
NASA rover lands on Mars. Saudi Arabia, soldiers from...
So what you heard there were little DTMF tones. And when Jen took a picture of the object, the first thing that happened was a telephone number was dialed, and it would connect to the right voice site. And then when she pressed the buttons of the image, we send very simple coordinates to the server. So the client is very, very lightweight. And the amount of data that has to go up the telephone line is very small. There's no huge amount of image processing. There isn't lots of data coming back and forth from recognition. Very simple way of connecting voice response services to objects via camera phones. Okay, so far we've talked about traditional HCI for development. So using sort of today's technology to think about solving today's problems. But what about that far out future that I mentioned a little earlier on? Now, something that has captured the imaginations of people for a long time is flying cars. Here are the Jetsons, a futuristic family, even now, from the 1960s, from California, who are traveling. Honestly, it's an amazing place, and you are all in it. They travel around in this lovely green flying car. Now, we're all grown up, and we're just thinking, yeah, that's kids, right? Nobody really expects the world to be like that. So obviously I've had a lot of time to read newspapers the last few days. Here's another cutting from the Guardian newspaper earlier this week, and it's illustrating a report in the UK. What do most British people want to see as a reality, apart from Brexit failing? This is not videoed, right? And you can see they want flying cars, and they want smart implants into the skin to monitor health. I guess if you're flying around in a flying car, you're panicking all the time, so you need smart implants to monitor your state of mind and body. It's an amazing place, the future, an amazing place. And conferences like Interact, Chi, WIST, Ubicomp, many others, companies have divisions where they imagine the future. You can go to trade shows where there are incredibly enticing prototypes, where you could see perhaps, this is Elon Musk's Hyperloop, a vision of how we will travel around the world in a small tube. Not for me, thank you very much. The middle one there is Hiroshi's group in MIT called Inform, where physicalization of objects happens rather than just touching the smartphone screen. But all of those things are done with people like us. We're all Californians now. We're all Californians. They're not done with emergent users on the whole. So emergent users have been engaged in terms of appropriating and accommodating and adapting interfaces. And that is fantastic work, and I encourage it. But what I'm talking about is involving people in that conversation, the imagination of the future. Because if we don't, then what's going to happen, and will increasingly happen, is that the technology we discard today will be in the hands of billions of people tomorrow. And that just seems a complete waste of human design, potential, and capability. So what about another future? What about a world that in 10 years' time, as you flip over, hopefully not a rectangle, you will see on the back, not designed in California, but designed perhaps elsewhere? I want to now share with you some of the work we've been doing to make some initial steps to involving emergent users in this far-off future. We called it, and this was a mistake, and you're just about to find out why. I've got to get myself ready to say it. Itinerative design. It is really hard to say. If you ever think of a phrase, make it more catchy. Itinerative design. But we've chosen it because it combines two things. Iteration. Iterative design is something I imagine that everyone here is familiar with. That going round in loops of having an idea, prototyping, testing, and repeating. But it also includes a journey, an itinerary, a movement of the imagination starting not in the imagination of California, but in communities who are emergent. So what we do is we go and we work with people in three places, three countries, in Kenya, in South Africa, and here in India. And those drive our imaginations. And together with and for those communities, we come up with insights and concepts and scenarios and prototypes. And those then start to ripple out, first to local experts. So perhaps people like you in Bangalore, or in Mumbai, or in Cape Town. And then out even further to traditional users in places like London. And as that journey unfolds, we reflect back with all of those people responses. And so together, driven by emergent users, we can weave potential alternative futures. Now, to help you get your head around this a little bit, I'm going to spend a little bit of time giving you just one iteration of our itinerative design process and show you some of the outputs that we've produced with people in Daravi, in Kailicha in South Africa, in Kibera in Nairobi. So this iteration took place a couple of years ago, and at the same time, we convened 3 groups in those 3 places. And between the 3 groups, there were about 50 future makers, emergent users, who worked alongside us. And we carried out, to start that process, a range of activities. One was, here's a piece of paper, please draw the phone that you'd like to have in 5 years' time. After this bit of homework, try and do that for yourself. What would you draw? The most ideal phone for you in 5 years' time. We also used a technique that others have used called the magic thing. And we gave them a simple bracelet. It didn't have anything on it. And we just said, this is a magic thing. It will do anything you like, anything at all. And we asked people to act out what they would like it to do. One telling response was to give me a house and to give me some money. Here are some of the participants in one of the places in Cape Town, and our local researcher, Mina Radebe, convened this session, while at the same time, other sessions were going on in real time in India and in Kenya. Let me just show you a couple of the outputs. Here is a design of a future phone by somebody who lives in a slum in Nairobi. So, first of all, one thing to note is it isn't simply a black rectangle. Have a look at it. Turn to somebody behind you, unless you're at the back, and that's difficult. What was this designer, this emergent user, thinking? Why did he, and it was a he, design his future phone like that? You've got 20 seconds. Have a look, and then turn to somebody. Critique that design. What was the designer thinking? Why did they draw it like that? If you've got the answer, shout it out. Anyone want to take a guess? What was the design rationale of this device? A hammer. Okay. Someone at the front said a hammer. Any other ideas? Better grip, yeah, okay. Because as you're moving around, you might drop the phone. Anything else, yeah?
Maybe give some light when you walk on the street.
Some light, okay, yes, when there's power outages. Maybe this is a better design to shed light on the floor. What about from this side? Oh, like a folded newspaper magazine. Yeah. You see people walking around with those kind of devices. Maybe they were suggesting a flexible device. Oh, yeah, brilliant. But actually, we did have a suggestion like that from one group, but this wasn't in this case. And the last one, Philippe, you had? Defense weapon. A defense weapon. Okay, I should point out, right, that whole design is the phone. Okay? It isn't someone's hand holding the phone. Okay? You'll see maybe the little annotation there says finger-like structures. They're not fingers. And the rationale, the explanation this emergent user told us was, you know, when I go out of the house, if I put down my phone, within about 1 second, the phone is gone, stolen. All right? And so what he wanted was a design that, you know, if there was a ne'er-do-well person and they glanced across, they would think that when I'm sitting here like this, doing something else, I still have my hand on the phone. Brilliant design. Here are some other sketches. So this was from a group of women who run a collective in Bangalore. They are domestic workers. So those of you who don't know that kind of setup, these ladies often move from house to house doing cleaning chores and maybe doing some cooking preparation. And a lot of their designs were about being able to connect with their loved ones in discreet ways. One of the designs, which I don't think is on here, was a hairbrush. And the lady explained to me that what she wanted was something that looked like a hairbrush, I wish I had hair. I did in the past, and I will in the future. It's a wonderful place, the future. I've forgotten. Oh, yeah. So she does her hairbrush like this, yeah? And each time she's able to make a connection to her husband back at home. Why did she want to do that? Why didn't she just pick up her phone and phone her husband up? Anyone? In a place where there's a lot of people around, so she wanted perhaps to have private, discreet connection with her husband. That's a great answer. Any others? Yeah, so that is what she said. She said, if I take my mobile phone out and use it when I'm meant to be working, my employer, and her words were, would hit me. Right? So she would want to be able to do this without causing attention to her action. So we took those ideas from Bangalore, from Kibera, from Cape Town. We worked them up, and we worked with emergent users to take them forward to the next step. What would this prototype be like? And during one of those sessions, they told us to look at things like this. This is another test for you. If you are not sight impaired, put your hand up if you can see one living creature. Fantastic. If you can see two, you need to see a doctor. Luckily, there are many of them in the room, but I wouldn't trust them. That's a stick insect. What about that? Hands up if you can see it. Oh, isn't that lovely, owl? Here's a tip. If you ever do a talk, show pictures of animals. People love it. It's got nothing to do with my talk. Oh, what about this one? Do you know what that is? Anyone see this? It's a leaf. It's a leaf frog. I made that up. But you can see the animal there? And even humans are quite good. Even humans are quite good at hiding when they have to, right? To fitting in to their environment, not causing offense, not drawing attention, but still being able to function. But as we've seen from our emergent users, there is one creature that we have created that doesn't fit in. It calls for our attention. It draws us down into the darkness of tap, 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 as opposed to keeping our heads up and looking at the wonderful world of nature and beyond. So we've been working with emergent users to build a system that when you put it down, it disappears, blends into the background. Now, we've only just started on this, and I'm going to show you a very clunky early prototype. But we had two design goals with the emergent users. One is, when you put it down, it fits into the context politely. But secondly, it can still be useful, that it can tell you your status of your messages or what connections that you've had. By the way, if you look at the picture, can you see my mobile phone hidden away there somewhere? Put your hands up. Yeah, good, excellent. You have all passed the test for eyes. Here's a video. So what Jen is doing here is both automatic and manual, trying to help the phone blend in. And now she's setting up various colors to respond to incoming messages. And a message comes in, and that color gently glimmers. If you move your hand across the device to do something else, you can subtly indicate to the chameleon phone that you want to get an update on what you've seen. We would never have thought about that idea if it hadn't been co-designed with emergent users. And our next step is to make devices made of new materials so they really can blend in, change their color fully, change their texture so they fit in but still are useful. Not designed in California. Another theme that came out of the workshops was resource sharing. So here's a little test to see what kind of traditional users you are. So put your hands up if you have a mobile phone. Keep it up, keep up, right? This is going to challenge some of you. Put your other hand up if you also have a laptop or a tablet. Okay, look, almost everyone. Okay, keep your hands up. Put your right leg up. If you also have quite a big telly at home. Television? Television? Yeah? Nice big screen. All right, put the remaining, obviously, if you haven't got all these body parts, I'm sorry, I'm not very good at this. Now put the remaining leg up if you have a desktop computer at work, a big screen computer. Oh my God, everyone, right? And one last thing, stick your tongue out, and I will take a picture. Stick your tongue out if you've got a Alexa or a Google Home device, you know, one of these smart speakers. You know, it's really off-putting people putting their tongues out at me. You've got lots of things, yeah? I've got lots of things. Our emergent users often have one thing. They're getting their hand onto the smartphone device. And so they worked with us and said, well, wouldn't it be great if we could put our devices together and share them? Not that we're all sitting there individually tapping, 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 but we pool the resources, so maybe we get a bigger screen together, maybe we can play games together. Maybe your phone has a better camera than mine. Perhaps I can use it at the same time as using mine, so I can take a better picture. Perhaps you have a data connection, and maybe I could share that and work together and have some fun or do something productive. So again, we went through that process of our iterative design, and we developed something called the Better Together framework. And I just want to run you through that again. Again, not designed in California, not my idea, but driven by our emergent users in India, in South Africa, in Kenya. What you see here is the big picture is a kind of conventional shopping site. Think of like Flipkart, yeah, or Amazon. So you have a shopping basket, you have categories, and you have objects in the middle. That's great if you've got a big screen. What we've done is to produce a framework which can take any elements from a big service and put them down onto multiple devices. So one of your phones becomes the shopping basket, other phones here become the objects that you might buy, and these here are the categories. So you've got to imagine a group of people together, put their phones down, and they use them together like this. So what you can see here is the shopping example. And again, instead of it being individuals tapping, this is a much more social and collaborative way of building your shopping list. And you can see you can turn things over to see new categories. It looks like we have a party there. Buy lots of things and put them into the shopping basket. We developed that with emergent users and we trialed it. And they said, it's all right, but can we do videos as well? And so they designed of us a way of watching YouTube on a number of devices. And let me just show you how that works. So here's how all of the phones join themselves together, first of all. Very simply, there's no internet connection between these phones. It's all local. Only one of the phones, the one right at the top, needs an internet connection. And that's the one that's going to display the video. The other phones are doing things like being the pause and play control. You can see Simon there pausing and starting the video. And others of the phones are showing related videos and comments. So together, they can have a different and richer experience. Remember that picture I showed you at the start, the family looking down, tap, 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 tap. Our emergent users could see ways of lifting up each other's eyes to have more of a social, co-located set of interactions. If you're interested in that particular application, there's a toolkit. You can download it, and you can create your own plugin for the Better Together framework. There's a fantastic one created here in IITB, in IDC, where the Shara Chakra keyboard, which is a brilliant app if you haven't looked at it, can be used on multiple devices. One of the devices is the keyboard, this one here, and because its job is only to be the keyboard, you can use the full real estate of the screen, and the other device is where you see the output. So if you've got ideas, download that toolkit, use that toolkit, and use it with emergent users. Not designed in California. I'm coming to the end of my talk. That's where I started. Depressed. I was depressed about a world which is increasingly, from my perspective, being drawn into the dark pools of despair. Despair because we're cutting each other off from our wider world, and also despair because of the ways in which it's encouraging, just our own thoughts and bad thoughts. I was also depressed because of the lack of design, yet another rectangle. A world where this seems to be the best user experience, but is in fact a drug. A world where looking down seems to be the right thing to do. But this is a closing keynote. You need to go out, and I need to call you to action. And I really need your help to develop hope. And this is the call for action. And we're going to do it again with asking you to raise your hands. Put your hand up if you are not working with emergent users yet. I'll ask this question. Quite a number of you. So for you, please start working with emergent users. Put your hands up if you're working with and for emergent users right now. Okay, again, lovely to see that number of hands go up. And that's quite unique to see here and interact in India. But whatever you're doing, work with emergent users. Ask them not about the terrible problems, but ask them to fix your eyes on a future which is not designed in California. The theme of this conference, a great conference, Anirudh, was Global Thoughts, Local Designs. And because the conference is over, I'm going to change that, just slightly. And I would say, think about local thoughts that become global designs. So that in the future, a wonderful future, you will have ideas envisaged in Dalavi, in Kibera, in Langer, in Delft, and enjoyed everywhere in the world. Thank you very much. And that's kind applause, and I would take that as applause for these people. So as you can imagine, well, probably easy to imagine, I do very little of the work, and here we have some fantastic colleagues and funders and collaborators. So my thanks to them.
Thank you. What a wonderful way to address the conference theme of giving hope to everybody. I'm sure there's a number of questions, discussions. There's microphones standing here, so please line up for that. And while you're walking up, I have the privilege of doing the first one. With your thoughts on the development and also your sort of view on developed in California and with the recent political development in the world and so forth, that may in the future be the emerging market.
Yeah, absolutely. And
so what effect would that have if that would happen?
I think, it's important that what I said there are already many divisions in the world. So I love California. It's a wonderful place. And the imagination of California is fantastic. What I'm arguing for, I suppose, is an interweaving of perspectives. So what itinerative design does is to mesh those two imaginations and futures and thoughts together. So just like the application, we are definitely better together. And we need to have that perspective rather than thinking that one system is better or worse. The world is always changing. I mean, what is currently seen as the developing world, the emergent markets, you just need to turn back the clock, 500, 1,000 years, and those places were the powerhouses of the world. And so we, from California and from London and from elsewhere, must always be humble and aware of that, absolutely.
Very good indeed. Please state your name and question.
Hello.
I'm Naveen. I'm Sister Bangalore. Great talk, Matt, and it's quite inspiring. I had a question.
Just a minute, the microphone's not working, which
Maybe I
means
just use
I
this.
can't.
Okay.
You might have come close to it, I don't know.
Okay. So great talk, very inspiring. I had one question. So I mean, especially with the chameleon phone, and that idea definitely came from the workshops and the stuff that you did. And with this particularly one person, one of the concerns that I have, and in my work too, is how do we include that person in the entire process when the phone becomes a product, for example? How, because that was that person's idea in many ways. Absolutely. And not just that person, of course, that entire, how do we as researchers and designers not take their ideas and run away with it, but also try to include them in authorships, in platforms, and and also in profits?
That's a brilliant and very important question. So for the chameleon phone, the ideas and themes about security and discretion and then hiding came from all of the three places in parallel, which is interesting because they're very different types of emergent users. But we had that question, that very question, from one group in Langer, which is part of Cape Town. This lady stood up and said, "You're going to get rich out of this." And I said, well, no, I don't think so. You know, I was really kind of, I wasn't expecting that. And she said, what are you going to do for us? Which I guess is what your question to me is. And I don't have a brilliant answer. The way we do things is up front, we explain what we're doing, and we have a long-term relationship. So this iterative design isn't a case of going to a group and quickly sketching down or talking and never going back. We attempt to go back to communities, show them prototypes, show them development, tell them what we're doing with the prototypes and devices. And then the other thing I said to the lady was, you know, I'm an academic and this is all open source, and you know, in a way it's out of my control then. It was an inadequate answer to her, and it's an inadequate answer to you. But it is a big, big issue for us all, yeah? To think about when we're getting inspired by these communities, how do we make sure those things resonate back? I suppose a nice way of looking at it is, if we do get designs which are not from this future called California, but are from Kailicha and Delft and Cape Town, then they will be better for those people. So back to the community will flow not tangible direct things, not money, but a different way of looking at the world. But as you can see by my waffling, it's a question that causes me angst, and I don't have the answer. But this is a conference. It's something we all have to think of. So thank you for your question.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Thank you very much. Inspiring talk. Kaveh Bazargan, National University of Iran. So part of the emerging users you're referring to are in Asia. The first day there was a symposium here called the Symposium on Research about Asian researchers in HCI. What would be your recommendation as a digital agenda for these emerging researchers also in HCI that are trying to advance research and practice, also touching the emerging users, because it's quite challenging. And yesterday the professional associations, that Logos is just here, of India for HCI is trying to advance that. I'm from Iran, I'm the chair of SIG-CHI. And also the topic that you mentioned, HCI 4D, it was the topic of another workshop that we had about sustainability and HCI, and there's also greenwashing there. What is your uptake on that? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. So there are lots and lots of things that all of us can do to work together to try and make things a better world, right? But there are too many things for each of us to do. So you have to make choices. Now, in my life, I've taken opportunities. So although when you give a talk like this, it appears that, you know, this was some kind of great plan and a great agenda. In fact, whenever someone asks me about, you know, what's my research agenda, even at my age, I start to panic because I don't have one. And in this kind of context, I would encourage engagement. So in all of these systems, they've emerged over many years, right? The first step was to find local partners. I've been absolutely blessed to find great ones here in India through Microsoft Research, through IDC, through IBM Delhi. Then go and make a connection with a community and go without expectation. Don't be thinking about your Kai paper or some policy book, but just go and see what happens. You have to be flexible and agile because things change all the time. So that's my only advice, is to go and do it, but work and be connected locally. And because it's a big world, there are quite a number of us here, between us we could get a lot done. But another piece of advice is don't try and do it all. Okay?
So you say that the research assessment exercise should try to distinguish to what extent we manage to create hope through our research as well?
Well, wouldn't that be a lovely metric if instead of the most rigorous paper at Interact or Chi, the best reviews, it was the one that made people have hope and smile. I think Albrecht, I couldn't go to his talk because I hadn't arrived, was talking about happiness. And I'm glad that we have happiness at the start and hope at the end, because that's what it's all about. And that's what we should be developing systems for, not just for emergent users, but everyone.
Good.
Hi, Himanshu, University of Fribourg, Switzerland. Thank you, Matt, for an insightful talk. I have a question related to your image from Jetsons and futurism in general. So I read an essay last year in a scientific magazine which said Jetsons is a good example of projection bias because they imagined flying cars, but they failed to imagine women in workplaces.
Yeah.
And so, because when we think in HCI, we say, okay, what is it going to be?
But you see, they should have gone to the Bangalore Women's Collective, and they would have seen many women working very hard all the time. And you're right.
This is about maybe 1960s
exactly,
at that time, and
yeah.
People were imagining flying cars and all these things, but no women in workplaces. So what are your views on how to handle with projection bias? Because in technology, you say, okay, based on the conditions today, we imagine our future for the next 2 years, 5 years. But
this is a sweeping statement, but it's a keynote, right? So you can say this. I mean, back in the 60s, probably the people doing the future envisaging were of one type, and they weren't diverse, and they didn't have perspectives. What I've been trying to show you today is not just in terms of gender perspectives or background perspectives, that you have as many eyes on the future, because otherwise, we will produce biases. And even us, and we're all great people, we will bring in our own biases into that future. So work alongside as many people as possible, particularly emergent users. But great question.
Thank you for the talk. So I'm Manikandan from Cube Cinema Technologies. So we have these technology giants like Google, Facebook, all of them, fighting for the user's time and pulling them into the black rectangle that you're talking about. In terms of, let's say, the autoplay video feature that they have, YouTube or Facebook. And so do you think, designers there should be more responsible and, give power to the users rather than, looking at their own profits and, user base?
And just to be clear, because I want to do future consultancy with these companies, there are many excellent design groups in Google and Apple and Facebook, and they have people working around the world thinking about different sensitivities to culture and to design. And so one of the things, though, your question takes it a bit further, is creating services where others can take those materials and create their own services. And I think that is very important. Be it a physical device or a platform, if we can provide, and it's very hard because if you take Android as an operating system, okay, designed in California, and it structures the way in which we think about the world. So even if you create an operating system where you can build bits of the system and plug it into it, the basic skeleton is coming from perhaps one perspective. So I absolutely endorse your approach. We should, as developers and software engineers, be thinking about how we can create things that other people can recreate with. But it's very hard to do that without bedding in a fundamental design perspective, however kind of lightweight that framework is. And our Better Together framework does that as well, okay? Even though it's designed to be used very flexibly. Really, really good question.
So we soon need to close, but we have yet 2 more questions. Then we pull the line after Janet there.
You think it'll sort of end at some point because the people in the emergent, those people, and then they'll be connected, and then they'll start thinking like everybody else because it'll all be homogenized, and then we'll run out of sources of inspiration?
So that's a really good question, and we've seen that happen, of course, with other forms of content and interaction. Take films. We've also seen in regions a great homegrown kind of view on entertainment and movies, particularly here, for example, in India. So the question, it's an interesting question, does it matter? If everybody gets their hands on a smartphone, the iPhone XX in 10 years' time, and everybody loves it, and they're all happy, and they turn it over, and it says designed in California, who cares?
But then there'll be nobody to make people happy anymore because we'll all be narcissists.
Maybe, and that's, I think, where I was driving at. So I think it's not too late to make a change, but it's becoming late, and we need to make that change.
Final question, Janet.
Yes. Hi, Matt. I'm Janet Wesson, as you know.
Nice to see you.
And I'm from Nelson Mandela University in South Africa. And I've lived most of my life in South Africa. And I'm afraid that I have to contradict some of the things you say. For example, a cell phone is an aspirational thing in South Africa and most of Africa. In fact, there's more cell phones per capita than there are people. So some people juggle 2 phones because they have contracts.
Sure.
The other thing is they may be living in the townships, and I don't know if you went into context in situ and did your focus groups. And if you have those pictures of those townships, they are all the roofs, which are tin shacks, are covered in DSTV satellites.
Yep.
Because they've got to have their satellite TV and they've got to have their mobile phones. And finally, that image of holding a phone, that doesn't happen in South Africa. In fact, we had a student on campus shot in the head for her phone. So you were advised not to use a phone in public. So I think maybe you must come and visit me.
Absolutely, and Cape Town in South Africa has been a huge inspiration to me. And one person not listed on that slide, who you know well too, Gary Marsden, was the inspiration, started me on that journey. And I think what he would say is, it's complicated, but that mustn't stop us engaging. But really important points. Thank you all very much indeed.
And thank you for giving us hope. Thanks to Matt Jones.